Hi guys, welcome back to exmolex. So you may never have heard before, but Mark Twain actually read and reviewed the Book of Mormon. I knew that he had read it and I knew that he had talked a little bit about it, but I didn't know that he'd gone through and really read it and did a whole review on it. So I actually haven't read it, but as an ex-Mormon, I thought it would be fun to go through and read it and get my reaction on camera. Hopefully it's interesting or funny in some way, otherwise this might end up being a boring video, but hopefully not. If it's terrible, I won't put it out, so if you're seeing this, that means it's funny, right? Mark Twain on the Book of Mormon in 1861, so this was only a few decades after the Book of Mormon was written. So it's a pretty long review, probably won't read the entire thing on camera, but I'll skim it and we'll just go through some of the main points. Here's the introduction. All men have heard of the Mormon Bible, but few except the elect have seen it, or at least taken the trouble to read it. I brought away a copy from Salt Lake. The book is a curiosity to me. It is such a pretentious affair, and yet so slow, so sleepy, such an insipid mess of inspiration. It is chloroform in print. Oh God. Okay, so as a Mormon, I would have disagreed. I would have said it's not boring. It doesn't make you tired. Chloroform in print, how rude. Yeah, the truth is that even as a Mormon, you're told to read the book over and over and over. So especially reading it over and over, it gets really old. Now as an ex-Mormon, I've read the Book of Mormon once through as an ex-Mormon, and I'm on my second read through right now. Yeah, it can be pretty tedious. Mark Twain saying it's chloroform in print, that's one of the funniest things I've ever heard. If Joseph Smith composed this book, the act was a miracle. Keeping awake while he did it was, at any rate. Okay, to be honest, I'm pretty sure that Mark Twain and I could have been good friends. This is funny stuff. If he, according to tradition, merely translated it from a certain ancient and mysteriously engraved plates of copper, which he declares he found under a stone in an out-of-the-way locality, the work of translating was equally a miracle for the same reason. Oh my God, he is dragging Joseph Smith. The book seems to be merely a prosy detail of imaginary history, with the Old Testament for a model, followed by a tedious plagiarism of the New Testament. I love that he called it imaginary history because after reading it, after studying it, that's what I believe it is too. It's just a figment of Joseph Smith's imagination. And yet it's written out as though this actually happened, and Mormons believe that the Book of Mormon actually happened. Everything in it is literal. Or is it just Joseph Smith's imagination? Let's keep going. The author labored to give his words and phrases the quaint, old-fashioned sound and structure of our King James translation of the scriptures, and the result is a mongrel, half modern glibness and half ancient simplicity and gravity. The latter is awkward and constrained, the former natural but grotesque by the contrast. Whenever he found his speech growing too modern, which was about every sentence or two, he ladled in a few such scriptural phrases as exceeding sore and it came to pass, etc., and made things satisfactory again. And it came to pass was his pet. If he had left that out, his Bible would have been only a pamphlet. Oh my God. Honestly though, it's true. I have been reading through the Book of Mormon again, and I remember especially going through 1st and 2nd Nephi just being like, wow, this is so repetitious. It would say the same thing over and over again, and the phrase, and it came to pass, honestly, it feels like it's every 2 or 3 verses. It gets so old. So next he goes over the title page and talks about why is Joseph Smith using wherefore when he could have used any other word, but wherefore sounds scriptural, so that's why he went with wherefore. So then he goes over the testimony of the 3 witnesses and the 8 witnesses. He says some people have to have a world of evidence before they can come anywhere in the neighborhood of believing anything. But for me, when a man tells me that he has seen the engravings which are upon the plates, and not only that, but an angel was there at the time and saw him see them, and probably took his receipt for it, I am very far on the road to conviction, no matter whether I ever heard of that man before or not, and even if I do not know the name of the angel or his nationality either. Then he goes through the 8 witnesses and says, and when I am far on the road to conviction, and 8 men, be they grammatical or otherwise, come forward and tell me that they have seen the plates too, and not only seen those plates, but hefted them, I am convinced. I could not feel more satisfied and at rest if the entire Whitmer family had testified. sounds pretty sarcastic. The witnesses consist of mostly Whitmers. I talked about in my video where I read the Book of Mormon again, how almost all of the witnesses are related. I'll leave a link to that in the description if you want to see those videos, but yeah, pretty funny. So he goes on to talk about the Book of Nephi. He talks about how the first book of Nephi is a plagiarism of the Old Testament because of, you know, the whole Nephi building a ship the way that Noah built an ark to sail across the water. He goes on, polygamy is a recent feature in the Mormon religion and was added by Brigham Young after Joseph Smith's death. Before that, it was regarded as an abomination. So, I mean, that's not technically true. Joseph Smith started practicing polygamy before telling anybody about polygamy, before, you know, the revelation in D&C that polygamy was supposed to be a thing. He was actually already taking on extra wives. But I think that most people didn't know about that. I mean, I didn't even know myself that Joseph Smith had dozens of wives until I left the church. So this verse from the Mormon Bible occurs in chapter 2 of the book of Jacob. For behold, thus saith the Lord, this people begin to wax in iniquity. They understand not the scriptures, for they seek to excuse themselves in committing whoredoms, because of the things which were written concerning David and Solomon his son. Behold, David and Solomon truly had many wives and concubines, which thing was abominable before me, saith the Lord. Wherefore, thus saith the Lord, I have led this people forth out of the land of Jerusalem by the power of mine arm, that I might raise up unto me a righteous branch from the fruit of the loins of Joseph. Wherefore I, the Lord God, will not suffer that this people shall do like unto them of old. So the Lord is saying he will not suffer that the people will do like they did in the old days, like David and Solomon did. He says it's an abomination. But Mark Twain goes on to say, however, the project failed, or at least the modern Mormon end of it, for Brigham suffers it. This verse is from the same chapter. Behold, the Lamanites your brethren, whom ye hate because of their filthiness, and the cursings which hath come upon their skins, are more righteous than you, for they have not forgotten the commandment of the Lord, which was given unto our fathers, that they should have, save it were one wife, and concubines they should have none. Yeah, it is pretty funny that the Mormons have this in their Book of Mormon, where God is saying it's an abomination to have multiple wives or concubines, and then, I guess, just changes his mind, which, I mean, let's be honest, the church does this all the time, where they'll be like, oh, it's God is saying this now, and then they'll be like, well, God works in mysterious ways. Like, I don't know, I guess he just changes his mind all the time. The Book of Ether is an incomprehensible medley of history, much of it relating to battles and sieges among people whom the reader has possibly never heard of, and who inhabited a country which is not set down in geography. There is a king with the remarkable name of Coriantumr. I'm glad he thinks that's funny too. And he warred with Sherod and Lib and Shiz and others in the plains of Heshlon, in the valley of Gilgal, in the wilderness of Achish, in the land of Moran, in the plains of Agosh and Ogath and Ramah, and the land of Korihor, and the hill Cumnor, by the waters of Ripliancum, etc., etc., etc. And it came to pass, after a deal of fighting, that Coriantumr, upon making calculations of his losses, found that there had been slain 2 millions of mighty men, and also their wives and their children, say 5 or 6 million. And he began to sorrow in his heart. Unquestionably, it was time. So he wrote to Shiz, asking a cessation of hostilities, and offering to give up his kingdom to save his people. Shiz declined, except upon condition that Coriantumr could come and let him cut his head off first, a thing which Coriantumr would not do. Then there was more fighting for a season. Then 4 years were devoted to gathering the forces for a final struggle, after which ensued a battle, which I take it as the most remarkable set forth in history, except perhaps that of the Kilkenny cats, which it resembles in some respects. This is the account of the gathering and the battle. And then he goes on to list verses 7, 8, and 9, talking about the battle. At the end of it, the Lord spake unto Ether and said unto him, go forth. And he went forth and beheld that the words of the Lord had been fulfilled. And he finished his record, and the 100th part I have not written. Mark Twain says, it seems a pity he did not finish, for after all of his dreary former chapters of commonplace, he stopped just as he was in danger of becoming interesting. The Mormon Bible is rather stupid and tiresome to read, but there is nothing vicious in its teachings. Its code of morals is unobjectionable. It is smoushed from the New Testament and no credit given, which basically is like saying it was pilfered from the New Testament. It was plagiarized from the New Testament. I do think that the Book of Mormon that Mark Twain read, this was in 1861, so the Book of Mormon has changed quite a bit since then, and some of it might be slightly different. I know that there's nearly 4,000 different changes that have been made in the Book of Mormon over the last almost 200 years. But he says a few things that I think are really funny, especially calling it chloroform in print because of how slow and boring it is. Of course, there's always Mormons that are like,
it is not boring or slow at all. I think it is the most interesting, spiritually fulfilling thing in the world. And every time I read it, I learn something new, even though I've read it 5,000 times. And I just love it so much, and blah, blah, blah.
Like, okay, Peter Priesthood, Molly Mormon, we get it. You're so righteous. Good for you. It's still boring. I also thought it was funny. He says it's rather stupid and tiresome to read. Yes, I agree. A lot of Mormons like to point out that Joseph Smith couldn't possibly have written the Book of Mormon because he was so young, because he didn't have an education, because he couldn't have done it so quickly without inspiration. When in reality, like, there are a lot of people who write books under conditions like that. For example, Christopher Paolini, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but he's the guy who wrote Aragon. He wrote that book when he was 15 and finished it when he was 17. It's way longer than the Book of Mormon, but he was younger than Joseph Smith. I think Joseph Smith was like 24 or 25 when the Book of Mormon was written. As far as being uneducated, there are a lot of authors who are less educated that have written books. There are people that have written books as far back as books have been around, and people didn't have as good of education then as they do now. As far as writing a book quickly, there are plenty of books that were written faster than the Book of Mormon. I think the church likes to claim that Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon in like just a couple of months, but books that are longer or just as long as the Book of Mormon have been written much quicker than that. I know that Stephen King has said that he writes 2,000 words a day, even on weekends and holidays. The book, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, was written in 2 days. So yeah, I mean, it's not like it would take tons of time. The Book of Mormon isn't a super long book. It's like, what, 200 or 300 pages? And then there's people that will talk about how could he have come up with all these different tribes, all these different people, all these different characters, all these different names, all these different places. And it's like, I mean, where do you think that fiction books come from? Like, that's what the authors of fiction books do. Think about Tolkien. He wrote The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and he created all of these different races, all of these different, creatures. And not only that, but he also wrote languages for them. Joseph Smith didn't do that. As a member of the church, I heard a lot of these different arguments, a lot of these like, well, how could he possibly have written such an amazing book all by himself at such a young age, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I mean, it happens. It's not that incredible. And in reality, and like Mark Twain says, it's a really, really boring book. There's not as much to it as the Mormons would make you think. Anyways, I will of course leave a link to Mark Twain's review of the Book of Mormon if you guys want to read the whole thing. I hope you found it interesting and funny. I certainly found it funny. To end the video, let's go ahead and thank my wonderful patrons. You guys are super amazing. I really appreciate all of your support. A special thank you to Tans and @Keegar for supporting the channel at the Demon tier on my Patreon. If you guys like the videos I make and want to support them, you can find links to do that in the description below. Other ways you can support the channel are liking the video, commenting, subscribing, or sharing it with people that you think might enjoy it. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at exmo_lex. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!